The rain was soft at first, barely a whisper against the window. Then it grew, a steady patter that soaked the silence like a slow drumbeat before something dreadful. I've always loved falling asleep to the sound of rain until one night, the rain brought something with it. Something that didn't belong. It was late October around the kind of night when everything feels heavier, blankets, air, even thoughts. I had just turned off the lamp, leaving only the gray glow of the street light filtering through the rain-slicked window. The rhythm of the water was soothing, hypnotic, almost like a lullaby. But then I heard something beneath it. At first, I thought it was just the wind. A soft tap, like a branch scraping the window pane. But it was too precise. Too even. Tap, tap, tap. Like fingers. I sat up, the air immediately colder, my breath fogging slightly in the dark. The window was closed. I lived on the third floor. There was no balcony. There was no tree. I told myself it was nothing. Sleep deprivation can play tricks on you. Maybe I was dreaming. I closed my eyes again, pulling the covers up tighter. The rain thickened, beating harder, drowning everything else until it did. Something whispered my name. Not loud. Not clear. Like it was caught in the static of the rain. But I heard it. Jason. Faint, stretched, as if dragged across water. I froze. It kind of freeze where your bones forget how to move. The whisper came again, closer. This time from inside the room. Lightning flashed, and for a split second, I saw a silhouette standing near the door. A person unmoving. Not breathing. Then darkness again. I scrambled for the light. Hand shaking so violently I knocked over the lamp before I found the switch. The room flooded with yellow light. Empty. I checked every inch of my apartment. Locked doors. Windows sealed. Nothing. No one. I did sleep. I barely blinked. By morning, I convinced myself it was a waking dream. A trick of my tired mind mixed with the sound of the storm. That was until I found the wet footprints. They led from the front door to the foot of my bed. Not muddy. Not dirty. Just wet. And possibly so. They had soaked in. They were fresh. That day, I installed cameras. 3. To be exact, one in the hallway. One facing the front door, one in my bedroom. It gave me some false comfort. Enough to make me believe I was safe again. But that night, as the rain returned, so did the tapping. I watched the footage the next morning with trembling hands. Around, the hallway camera flickered just once, but when it stabilized, a figure stood in the hallway. Not entering. Just appearing, as though the storm had dropped it there. It was tall, lean, with limbs that seemed too long. It walked past the front door without opening it. Straight toward the bedroom. My bedroom. The camera there caught everything. The figure did open the door. It didn't need to. It simply passed through. Like mist with shape. It stood over me motionless, watching. For nearly 15 minutes. Then it leaned forward. The audio feed was faint, but clear enough. The sound of water dripping, heavy and constant. And then the voice again. Wide into my ear. Jason. I stopped sleeping after that. For days I kept the lights on. Our plugs in. Anything to drown out the rain. But the rain kept finding me. It didn't matter if I played music or white noise. Beneath it all, I heard it. That whisper. And worse, on the third night, when I thought it finally dozed off, I woke to the smell of earth and rot. My pillow soaked. Not with sweat. With rainwater. Terrified, I reached for my phone. The screen was smeared with wet fingerprints. I checked the cameras again. Everything looked normal. Until this time, the figure didn't just watch. It leaned over me, hand outstretched. And though its face remained hidden in a blur of static and shadow, its mouth moved. No sound came through. But my body remembered the words when I woke. Let me in. I could stay. I packed a bag and drove 3 hours to my sister's place in the country. No city lights. No traffic. Just fields and open space. No rain in the forecast. I did tell her why I came. Just that I needed a few days. The first night was calm. Clear skies. Yeah. Until outside. Inside. A slow drip. Yeah. I opened the closet and found it soaked. Water leaking down from the ceiling. But the roof was new. There were no pipes above. I stepped back, and something cold brushed past me. I spun, heart crashing in my chest. There, in the window's reflection, stood the figure. Closer now. More defiant. Slim like grey cloth soaked in stormwater. Fingers too long. Head tilted, like it was listening. Let me in. I screamed. My sister came running. I told her everything. She thought I needed sleep. Happy. Maybe both. But that night, she heard it too. Her name, whispered in the storm. Emily. She believes me now. We both do. We've checked the cameras again and again. We've left offerings. Right. Orange sage. Moved houses. It does matter. When the rain comes, it finds us. And when it whispers your name, don't answer. Never answer. Because the moment you do, you've already let it in. A man named Jason tries to fall asleep to the soothing sound of rain, but begins to hear a natural tapping and whispers calling his name during a stormy night. Despite being alone on the third floor of his building, he sees a silhouette during the lightning flash and finds wet footprints inside his apartment the next morning, though all doors and windows were locked, confirming that something had entered. Jason installs surveillance cameras, hoping to catch the intruder. At night, he reviews footage showing a tall, distorted figure appearing in his hallway and standing silently over him as he sleeps, whispering his name. The haunting escalates each night with worsening experience as she wakes to find his pillow soaked in rainwater, smells decay in the air, and receives a chilling message from the entity. Let me in. Desperate for safety, Jason flees to his sister Emily's remote home where there's no expected rain. But the phenomenon follows him there. The rain returns and begins leaking from inside her house. Emily hears the whispers too, proving it's not in Jason's mind. Despite fleeing, praying, and even moving homes, the rain and the entity always find them, whispering their names and seeking permission to enter. The rain had always been Jason's comfort. From childhood, its steady rhythm had lulled him into sleep, like nature's own lullaby. He remembered nights as a boy when storms rolled in and thunder cracked through the skies, but the rain itself had always calmed him. It drowned out the chaos of thoughts and noises that kept him awake. It felt like a wall between him and the world. A shield. So that night, when the storm arrived just past 1 in the morning, he welcomed it. Jason lived alone in a third-floor apartment nestled in an older building that had creaked and groaned with age, but had a kind of worn charm to it. Outside, the streetlight flickered now and then through the thin curtains. He had just turned off his bedside lamp and settled beneath the covers, listening to the soft hiss of the rain fall against the window. It was peaceful, even hypnotic. His body relaxed. His thoughts drifted. He felt sleep begin to pull him down. But then, faintly, almost too faintly to notice, he heard it. At first, it sounded like nothing more than the shifting of an old building, or maybe the occasional tap of a loose shutter. But Jason didn't have shutters. He sat up slightly, straining to hear. The patter of rain was steady, flowing. But underneath that sound was another. A separate rhythm. A deliberate one. Tap tap tap. It was slow. Even. Like fingers drumming softly on a surface. But that wasn't the strange part. The strange part was where it was coming from. Not from the roof. Not from the walls. It was coming from the window. Jason frowned and turned his head. The window was closed. It had been shut since the morning. The latch was still in place. There was no balcony. No fire escape. Nothing that could allow someone to reach it, not from the third floor. He got out of bed and stepped closer to the window, his bare feet cold against the wooden floorboards. The rain streamed down the glass in long, sneaking trails, but there was nothing outside. Just the streetlight, casting a pale yellow glow onto the wet pavement below. No movement. No people. Just rain. And he heard it again. Tap tap tap. This time, it wasn't coming from the outside. It was from inside the room. Jason's breath caught. He spun around quickly, heart suddenly pounding in his chest. He reached for the lamp and switched it back on. The room lit up in soft amber light. Everything looked the same. The worn bookshelf. The closed closet. His phone on the nightstand, screen dim and undisturbed. But the air felt different. Older. Heavy, as if something was pressing down on the room itself. He stood frozen, listening. Waiting. The tapping had stopped, but in its place came a sound that made his blood run cold. A whisper. Not loud. Not harsh. A soft, stretched sound that melted into the rain so smoothly that for a moment he wasn't sure if he'd actually heard it. But the name was unmistakable. Jason. His knees nearly buckled. It was the sound of his name, spoken by something that did belong in this world. The voice wasn't human, or at least not anymore. It was like a recording played underwater, distorted, distant, and yet somehow right there in the room with him. He stood there for a long moment, rooted in place, his skin crawling. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but where would he go? It was his apartment. It was supposed to be safe. The lights were on. The doors were locked. He hadn't even opened a window. Still shaking, he made his way through the apartment. Checked every lock. Every room. The bathroom. The kitchen. The small hallway. Nothing. No sign of anyone. No windows cracked. No door ajar. He even checked under the bed, though he had done that since he was 10. Everything was in order. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something had been in the room with him. Or still was. Eventually, he made his way back to bed. He did turn the lamp off this time. He lay there under the glow of the soft light, staring up at the ceiling, listening to the rain, heart still thudding in his chest. That's when he noticed the pattern of the raindrops. Before it had been random. Natural. But now it was too controlled. Too rhythmic. Almost like the sound was imitating something else. A beat. Yeah. 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 Like footsteps. Jason sat up again, now fully alert. The sound didn't seem to come from the window anymore. It was overhead. Above the ceiling. But he lived on the top floor. No one was up there. He slowly moved his gaze toward the ceiling, holding his breath. The tapping continued, measured and slow, as if pacing back and forth. He did want to believe it. Maybe the building's structure was playing tricks on him. Maybe water was dripping into the walls. Maybe, just maybe, it was the storm playing games. He forced himself to lie down again, pulling the covers tightly up to his chin. He told himself to close his eyes. Ignore it. To wait for it to stop. But just as his eyes fluttered shut, another whisper slid through the air. Closer this time. Jason. He sat up with a jolt. Lightning cracked outside, illuminating the room in white for a single instant, and in that blink of light, he saw a figure. A silhouette standing in the far corner near the door. It didn't move. Didn't pray. Just stood there, tall and narrow and impossibly still. Before his brain could even react, darkness swallowed the room again. Jason lunged for the lamp, knocking it off the nightstand in his panic. It fell with a thud and rolled, but the bulb stayed intact, spilling golden light back into the room. There was nothing there. No figure. No sound. Just the steady rhythm of rain against the window. But Jason was no longer comforted by it. It wasn't a lullaby anymore. It was something else. Something alive. Something watching. Something that had spoken his name. Morning came slowly, and with it a fragile sense of safety. The gray light of dawn filtered through the rain-streaked window, casting the room in a dull, lifeless hue. Jason had slept. Not really. He drifted in and out, heart hammering at every creak of the wood or gust of wind. Each time his eyes closed, he expected to open them and see the silhouette again closer, maybe standing at the foot of his bed, waiting. But there had been nothing. Only silence. Only rain. The storm had slowed to a drizzle, though the sky remained an oppressive blanket of slate. Jason sat on the edge of the bed, hunched forward, his face in his hands. His skin was clammy. Eyes bloodshot. He couldn't shake the voice from his memory the way it had whispered his name, drawn out and soaking with something inhuman. There had been no intruder. No break-in. He had searched the apartment. Everything was locked. Everything was normal. At least, that's what he had convinced himself of until he walked into the hallway. He was on his way to the kitchen, moving slowly, steps heavy with exhaustion. But something stopped him in his tracks. A wet spot. Just one at first, but unmistakably clear shoe print. A footprint. A bare one. He blinked, frozen, trying to make sense of it. The hallway was narrow, the wooden floor pale oak. And there, just past the bedroom doorway, was a damp, glistening outline of a foot. It wasn't a smudge. It was perfect. The toes, the arch of the heel. Clear as if someone had just stepped out of a bath and walked barefoot across the floor. Jason's mouth went dry. He crouched and touched the edge of it with shaking fingers. Wet. Still wet. The print had been there last night. It had soaked in. The moisture sat on the surface of the wood, as though it had been left just minutes before. He stood up, heart pounding now with a different rhythm. One of dread. His eyes followed the direction of the footprint. It pointed inward toward the bedroom. Slowly he backed up, retracing its path. Two more prints appeared behind the first, faint but visible. And then another. A trail. The footprints started from the front door. Jason walked carefully toward the entrance of his apartment. Every step felt like a scream building in his chest. The door was closed. The bolt was still locked. The chain latch still hooked in place. There were no signs of forced entry. No scratches. No scuffs. The doorknob was dry. And yet the prints began just inside the door frame. As if somebody or something had emerged from nowhere and walked, dripping, through his home. His breath caught again as he noticed a new detail. The footprints didn't just go toward the bedroom. They stopped at the foot of his bed. He had seen them in the night. He had looked. And now under the daylight's cold glare, they were obvious. 5, maybe 6 steps, all wet, perfectly spaced, moving with purpose. One of the prints was half smeared, as though the thing had shifted its weight while standing there watching him. Jason felt bile rise in his throat. He turned and rushed into the bathroom, barely making it to the sink before he vomited. The image of the figure in the corner of his room flickered behind his eyes again, burned into memory by that flash of lightning. It had been imagined. It had been a dream. Something had been in the room with him. Something had walked through his locked apartment and stood by his bed. The smell hit him next. Faint, but unmistakable. Dampness like soil. Like leaves that had been left too long underwater. That kind of rot. It clung to the air, subtle and sickening. He turned on the fan, opened the window, tried to breathe. Every part of him screamed to leave the apartment, to get out and never come back. But part of him also needed to understand what had happened. Needed to prove to himself that he was losing his mind. He took photos of the footprints. Not just one, but all of them. Step by step. He even marked them lightly with tape so he could map their path. There was no other explanation. No logical reason for them to exist unless someone had been inside. But how? He thought of calling the police, but stopped himself. What would he even say? That someone had broken into his apartment without unlocking the door. That they left no trace except a trail of damp footprints and a whisper in the dark. They'd think he was hallucinating. They might not be wrong. But Jason knew what he had seen. He knew what he had heard. And those footprints were real. They were the proof he couldn't deny. He grabbed his phone and pulled up the camera app. Maybe, just maybe, something had been caught by chance. He had installed any security before he had never needed to, but he had set up motion capture alerts on his hallway smart light. When he opened the device log, a knot formed in his stomach. There was a motion event logged at exactly the time he remembered hearing the whisper. Jason tapped the file, hands shaking. The app showed a short burst of light, a flicker, like something passed in front of the sensor. And then nothing. No body. No shadow. Just an unnatural pause in the otherwise consistent recording, like something had glitched or scrambled the signal for just a moment. It was enough to make his skin crawl. He set the phone down and backed into the kitchen, leaning against the counter, trying to slow his breathing. His mind swirled with theories. A sleepwalking intruder. A neighbor pulling a cruel prank. A break-in that somehow did trip any locks or alarms. But none of it fit. The figure had opened the door. It had simply been there. Just like the footprints had simply started. There was no origin. No beginning. Jason suddenly remembered something else just before he had fallen asleep. He had noticed the rhythm of the rain changing. At the time, it had seemed insignificant. A slight shift. A different tempo. But now it chilled him to the bone. The tapping had been random. It had matched the footsteps. It had been moving when he wasn't looking. When the room was dark. When lightning blinded him for a second. It had walked through his apartment as if it belonged there. And now the question that echoed in his head was, what was it? But how did it get in? And was it ever truly gone? Jason didn't sleep the next night. Not out of choice, but necessity. The memory of those wet footprints haunted him more than the voice had. It was the dream. It was the hallucination. Something had walked through his locked apartment and stood inches away from him as he slept. It had left a trail. A message. It had come in silence, in rain, and disappeared just as easily. By midday, Jason had already ordered 3 security cameras overnight shipping, the best indoor models he could afford. He did care about the price. All he needed was evidence. If it came again, he wanted to see it. Know it. Understand what was happening to him. The cameras arrived just after sunset. He set them up immediately, hands unsteady, breath shallow. One he placed in the hallway, angled directly at the front door. The second he fixed in the bedroom, pointing toward the bed and the window. The third he set in the main living area, catching both the hallway and kitchen entrances. Each camera had infrared night vision, motion sensors, and cloud backup. If something happened, had no. I'd pay him. Everything was ready. Jason sat alone in his room, the weight of silence pressing down on him. The rain had started yet, but the sky outside was bloated with clouds, dark and low, threatening to split open at any moment. He stared at the live feeds on his phone. 3 black and white images of empty rooms. Nothing moved. Not even dust. He left the lights on that night. Every one of them. He couldn't bring himself to sleep in darkness again. He stayed curled beneath the covers, phone in hand, eyes flickering from one live feed to another, watching. Waiting. At exactly, the first raindrops started to hit the window. So measured. The sound crawled into the room, a gentle patter that should have been comforting. But for Jason, it was the beginning of a countdown. He stared harder at the bedroom camera feed. Nothing. He turned the volume up and tried to hear it through the phone's mic. All it picked up was the soft tap of rainfall and the low hum of electricity. And the hallway camera flickered. It was dramatic. Not like a power outage. Just a single stutter. The kind of scream makes when a connection slips for half a second. Jason sat bolt upright, eyes locked onto the feed. He rewound the footage by 10 seconds and watched. The hallway stood empty. Static. A figure stood in the frame. Jason's heart stopped. The air in the room felt thin. He stared at the figure, tall, unmoving, like a shadow pulled from a nightmare. It was the person. It could be. The thing's limbs were too long. Its posture too unnatural. It stood in the hallway, facing the camera but not directly. Its face was blurred. Not by technology, but by something else. Something wrong. Like the camera couldn't focus on it. The figure did walk in from anywhere. It did open the door. It simply appeared between frames. 1 second there was nothing. The next it stood in his home. Jason's breath shook. His hands trembled as he tapped into the bedroom feed. It was there too. The figure passed through the door without opening it. No hinges creaked. No latch turned. It just phased through, like fog made flesh. The camera did glitch this time. It showed every second clearly. The figure drifted into the room, step by step, soundless. Jason stared at the footage in frozen disbelief. He watched himself lying in bed, still and unaware. He watched the figure stop at the edge of the bed, towering over his sleeping form. It didn't move. It didn't bend. Just stood. Watching. Then it leaned forward. Jason's throat tightened as he watched the footage. The entity's face, what little could be made of it, lowered closer to his own. His blurred mouth moved. Slowly. Deliberately. There was no audio at first. Nothing but the white hiss of the rain outside. Then, as the figure hovered just inches from his sleeping face, a sound began to emerge through the microphone. Not a growl. Not a screech. Something worse. It whispered. Jason. A drawn-out murmur, as if spoken underwater. The name echoed inside the room, but only on the recording. Jason remembered nothing. He had woken. But hearing it now, through the camera feed, made his entire body lock up. It was just a name. It was possession. Like the sound itself had weight. Like it clung to the corners of the room. The whisper repeated. Jason. Jason's chest heaved as he pressed pause. A figure stood frozen on the screen, leaning over him. Mouth twisted mid-syllable. Its face was still blurred, but somehow Jason could feel it looking back. Through the recording. Through the screen. He backed away from the phone, nearly dropping it. Panic swelled in his lungs, acid hot and choking. He stumbled into the kitchen, flipped every light on again, and stood with his back against the wall. The room felt tighter now, as though something had been disturbed. Awakened. He tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a glitch. A prank. A virus in the feed. Maybe the software had rendered a phantom due to lag. But deep down, he did believe that. He knew the difference between a glitch and something real. And what he saw was real. He returned to the footage an hour later, when the rain had stopped and his heartbeat slowed enough to function. The figure vanished just as it had arrived suddenly, without transition. 1 second it was there, hunched beside his bed. The next it was gone. No departure. No exit. The only trace it left behind was the whisper. And on his floor, the footprints again. He saw them when he finally left the bedroom. Small puddles this time. Like dripping water had collected where the figure had stood. The footprints were smeared, as if whatever it was had lingered longer this time. Jason spent the rest of the morning reviewing footage, saving clips, and uploading them to encrypted drives. He did tell anyone. Not yet. Who would believe him? A ghost caught on camera. A shadow whispering through a storm. But deep inside, something had changed. He no longer questioned whether it had happened. Only why. Why had it chosen him? And what did it want? The cameras were supposed to protect him. But all they had done was prove the nightmare was real. Jason didn't bother pretending anymore. He no longer tried to convince himself that this was just stress or sleep deprivation. The footage was undeniable. Something had entered his apartment in the middle of the night, something that did use doors, didn't care for locks, and whispered his name like it had known him forever. The camera had caught it clearly, standing over him with that impossible blur where a face should be, mouthing words that sent ice down his spine. He didn't sleep the next night either. Nor the one after that. Sleep felt like vulnerability now, like surrender. The very idea of closing his eyes in that room made his chest tighten with dread. During the day, he tried to function working from home, eating what little he could keep down, and checking the cameras obsessively, but by night, his world shrank down to one instinct: survive until morning. He started keeping a kitchen knife next to his bed. Useless, probably, against something that could walk through walls. But it made him feel a fraction less helpless. Every night, like clockwork, the rain came. It didn't matter what the forecast said. The sky would clear in the afternoon, bright and unassuming, and then by dawn, the clouds would gather, and the soft patter would begin. He had started to recognize a pattern in the audio footage. Every time the whisper came, the rain outside would momentarily lessen, as if the very air around his apartment grew quiet, holding its breath, waiting. Then the voice would come, whispering his name, always in that same drawn-out, breathless way. And each time, it seemed to be getting closer. On the fourth night, something changed. Jason had tried to stay awake again, chugging coffee, pacing the living room, refreshing the camera feeds over and over. The apartment was a battlefield of light, every bulb burning to ward off the darkness. But despite everything, sometime around, exhaustion finally won. He nodded off on the couch, the hum of electronics lulling him into a fragile half-sleep. And then he dreamed. Only it did feel like a dream. Not really. It felt too vivid. Too detailed. In it he was standing in his bedroom. But it wasn't his room anymore. The walls spilled with damp, the ceiling dripped steadily, and the floor was submerged in shallow, black water. A sound echoed in the distance: wet footsteps, slow and deliberate. He turned, and through the open doorway he saw it. A figure, taller than before, head brushing the top of the frame, body wrapped in something that looked like soaking cloth clinging to wet skin. Its face was still wrong, hidden behind that eternal distortion, like it was being smudged by some unseen hand. And now it spoke clearly. "Let me in." The words did echo. They didn't shake the walls or make the air tremble. They were quiet, almost gentle. A request, not a demand. Jason woke with a scream lodged in his throat, covered in cold sweat. The rain outside was heavier now, nearly roaring. He scrambled for his phone, pulled up the live feed and froze. The figure was standing in his kitchen. It had come through the front door. The hallway camera had triggered. There had been no alert. It was just there. Suddenly, standing motionless in the middle of the room, facing the couch where he had just been sleeping. Jason dropped the phone. His heart thundered in his ears as he looked toward the kitchen. The lights were still on. Nothing was there. But when he picked up the phone again, the feed still showed the figure. It had moved. But now it seemed to be facing the camera, watching him watching it. A low static began to fill the audio feed. Faint at first, like interference. Then came the voice again. "Let me in." Jason flung the phone across the room and backed away until his back hit the wall. He could barely breathe. His legs shook beneath him. It wasn't just appearing in the footage anymore, it was crossing into his awareness. Into his mind. He spent the rest of the night in the stairwell of the building, clutching a flashlight and staring at the rain-streaked window at the end of the hall. He didn't dare go back into his apartment until the sun came up. And even then, it did feel like the nightmare was over. That morning, he found something else. Not just footprints, but marks on his ceiling. Long damp streaks, like fingers dragged through condensation. They arced over his bed, 5 parallel lines of moisture trailing off toward the wall. He stared up at them for a long time, jaw clenched tight enough to hurt. It had been leaning over him again. He remembered the dream. The voice. The words. Let me in. Jason realized something terrifying in that moment. This wasn't just a haunting. It wasn't just an entity passing through. It wanted to be invited. It was waiting for permission. But what kind of thing needed to ask? What kind of thing respected rules like that? And what would happen if somehow, somewhere, in a moment of fear or confusion, he did let it in? He began to notice it more during the day too. Not the figure itself, but its presence. When he passed mirrors, sometimes his reflection seemed slightly delayed. He would catch a glimpse of movement in the corner of his eye, a dark blur just outside the frame of his vision. His electronics would glitch. Phones freezing. His switching on by themselves. Always around the same time. And the rain. It never stopped now. Even when the forecast was clear, clouds would form above his building. The rest of the block might be dry, but his street would be soaked, the sky overhead a churning mass of gray. He began to dread the quiet between raindrops. That moment of stillness when the storm paused and the voice returned. Let me in. Sometimes he would find the words written into the condensation on his windows. Not scrawled, but etched, as if by a fingertip drawn slowly and deliberately across the fogged glass. He stopped touching the windows. He stopped answering his phone. He even stopped saying his own name. He feared that simply acknowledging it gave the thing power. But the fear was becoming something deeper. Something corrosive. Because he could feel it waiting. And he didn't know how much longer he could resist. Jason didn't remember the drive. He only remembered the fear. The kind that sinks into your bones and whispers that you'll never be safe again. After what happened that fifth night, the voice becoming louder. The figure showing up not just in footage, but in places it shouldn't be. The words let me in scratching at the walls of his mind. He knew he had to get out. And he where? Far from the apartment. Far from the rain. He did pack much. A duffel bag of clothes, a few memory cards with the footage, his phone, charger, and the knife from his nightstand. He drove with shaking hands, headlights cutting through the misty dawn as the rain continued to fall behind him, chasing him like a predator that never tires. His sister Emily lived 3 hours away, in a quiet rural town surrounded by farmland and pine trees. She had no idea what he had been going through. He had told her anything about the figure or the whispers. He just said he needed a place to stay for a few nights, and without hesitation, she said yes. Emily had always been the kind sibling. The kind who didn't ask too many questions. But the moment she saw his face as he arrived, sunken eyes, pale skin, a haunted look etched into every feature, she understood something was deeply wrong. Her house was modest and more. No apartment neighbors. No flickering streetlights. No city noise. Just a long dirt road, a wraparound porch, and trees that swayed in the wind. The forecast had said clear skies all week, and when Jason arrived, the sky above was blue and cloudless. He stepped out of the car and let the silence wrap around him. For the first time in days, there was no rain. No tapping. No voice. Just the sound of birds and the distant rustle of leaves. That night, Emily made dinner and tried to keep the conversation light, but Jason barely touched his food. He kept glancing at the windows, watching for signs of rain, half expecting it to start pouring from a sky that didn't care about weather reports. She did press him. She just handed him clean sheets, showed him to the guest room, and told him to sleep as long as he needed. The room was quiet, painted in warm colors, with a soft bed and thick curtains. Jason tried to relax. He left the door slightly open, the bedside lamp on low. He double-checked the windows. Locked. Sealed. The house smelled of lavender and cedar. Safe smells. Comforting. He lay down and for the first time in what felt like years, closed his eyes without a screen in front of him. He didn't know what time it was when he woke up, only that it was still dark. At first, he didn't understand why. Then he heard it. The sound was faint, but unmistakable, water hitting wood. Jason sat up slowly. The room was quiet otherwise. No one. No thunder. Just that slow, steady drip. He reached over and turned the lamp up. The light filled the room, soft and gold. Everything looked normal. Then his eyes landed on the closet. The door was cracked open slightly, He stared at it for a long moment before stepping out of bed. The floor was cold. His skin prickled. He walked toward the closet, each step heavier than the last. As he reached it, the dripping grew louder. Here. 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 He opened the door. Nothing in sight except folded clothes, hangers, and a few boxes. But then he looked up. The ceiling above the closet was soaked. Water ran in thin streams down the wood, darkening the boards. It had rained all day. The roof was brand new. There were no pipes overhead. Yet water was dripping steadily from the ceiling into the closet. Jason stepped back, heart thudding. He felt it again, that shift in the air. That pressure. The sense of being watched. He turned toward the window. Outside, the world had changed. Rain. Not a drizzle, but a downpour. The kind that blurred everything. That soaked the trees, turned dirt to mud, and drowned all other sound. Jason's breath caught in his throat. It wasn't supposed to rain. Not here. Not tonight. He stumbled out of the room and down the hallway. Emily was standing in the kitchen in her robe, staring out the back door, holding a glass of water that trembled in her hand. "You heard it too?" she asked, not looking at him. Jason nodded. He joined her at the door, and together they watched the rain hammer the porch. The wind had picked up, trees bending in waves. But there was something wrong about it all, something too sudden. Too purposeful. "I thought I was dreaming," she said quietly. "I was in bed and I heard it. My name." Jason's blood turned cold. "It whispered to you." Emily finally turned to face him. Her expression was pale. Eyes wide. "Yes, like it was standing right next to me," it said. "Emily. Twice." I sat up and I swear, Jay, I saw something move past the doorway. Jason felt the panic rise in his chest like floodwater. It had followed him. Somehow, despite the distance. Despite the locked windows and fresh air and rural peace, it had found him. And now it wasn't just speaking to him. It was reaching out to others. Affecting them. They checked the cameras Jason had brought. He had instinctively set them up again before sleeping, though it had felt like overkill at the time. Now he was grateful he had. When they played back the footage from the hallway, both Jason and Emily froze. At them, the footage began to distort. Not glitch warp. Like the hallway was bending inward. Then, from the end of the hallway, something formed. Not walking. Not appearing. Just emerging. A dark shape, tall, soaking wet, limbs stretching too far, head tilted just slightly in that same unnatural way Jason had seen before. It paused outside Emily's door. And it turned. And walked into Jason's room. A bedroom camera picked up everything. The figure passed into the room without touching the door. It did blur this time, it was almost clear now. The skin was pale and waterlogged, hanging like thin sheets over a skeletal frame. The face was still indistinct, but there were glimpses now of eyes, or holes where eyes should have been. The mouth was stretched too wide. Too still. As though waiting. It leaned over the bed. Over Jason's sleeping body. And then it spoke again. "Let me in." Jason shut the laptop and stood up, chest heaving. Emily sat frozen, unable to look away from the blank screen. "It's not just in the apartment," Jason whispered. "It's in the rain." They stayed awake the rest of the night, lights on, huddled in the living room. Emily believed him now. She had no choice. And yet, believing offered no comfort, the terror of knowing it was real. The rain didn't stop until dawn. And when they opened the front door that morning, there were wet footprints on the porch. There. Human. Leading directly to the door. But none leading away. Emily did try to reason with it. After watching the footage with her own eyes, seeing the shape emerge from nothing, glide through her hallway, and hover over her brother as he slept, she didn't question anything anymore. She only asked one thing: how long has this been happening to you? Jason didn't answer right away. What was the point? It wasn't a matter of days or weeks anymore. It felt timeless, like it had always been waiting, lurking just behind the curtain of reality, watching through the veil of Rainfall. He told her bits of it. The whispers. The footprints. The dreams. The way the rain followed him even when the sky promised sun. How every time he closed his eyes, he heard it breathing at the edge of thought, asking the same question again and again. "Let me in." Emily barely spoke for the rest of the day. She just moved through the house with tight shoulders and distant eyes, like someone walking through a field full of landmines. Jason couldn't blame her. Neither of them felt safe anymore, even in daylight. Especially in daylight because that's when the waiting happened. That quiet stillness before the storm. Every gust of wind felt like a warning. Every shadow looked a bit too deep. They tried to come up with a plan. Maybe they could leave together. Find a hotel far from this town. Stay somewhere completely dry, maybe in a desert, where it never rains. But even as they spoke the words, they felt empty. The same way Jason had felt when he first left his apartment. He thought distance would be safety. He thought new walls would keep it out. He was wrong. The storm came early that evening. I.p.m. Thunder rolled over the hills and black clouds swarmed the sky. The air grew heavy, dense with moisture. Like the very atmosphere was turning against them. Emily closed every window, locked every door, even covered the mirrors with sheets. Jason didn't ask why. He felt the urge to. He'd seen too many glimpses, too many distortions in glass that didn't match his movements. Sometimes the shape stood just behind his reflection, unmoving, as if waiting for eye contact. I.p.m. The rain returned. And with it the sound. Not just the patter of water on the roof and windows, but the drip that same slow, deliberate tapping he had first heard in his apartment. Now it echoed through Emily's home. From the hallway. From beneath the floorboards. From the attic. Jason checked the cameras again. One of them, the one in the hallway, had gone dark. Not glitched. Just black. As if the lens had been swallowed by shadow. He tapped the feed, refreshed it. Nothing. Then came the motion alert. A red dot blinked next to the bedroom camera. Jason tapped it. The feed opened. There it was. Not on the threshold. Not outside the door. Inside. Standing at the foot of the bed where Emily was sitting, watching the same screen. Her body stiff with horror as the image caught up with real time. They both looked up. Nothing was there. Jason pointed the camera at the room, still nothing. The device was recording something only it could see. But they could feel it. The air was ice. The pressure of something unseen, watching, waiting. Emily began to cry out of fear. But something deeper. A helplessness that only came when you realized you had been targeted by something you couldn't fight or outrun. I didn't answer it, she whispered, voice cracking. I didn't say anything. Jason looked at her. You heard it again. She nodded. Last night. Before the rain started. It said my name again. But it was different. It was inside my head. The blood drained from his face. He had never told her that part. The internal voice. The one that whispered through his dreams. Through the silence between raindrops. It wasn't just outside anymore. It was slipping in. Jason checked the front porch camera. Another red alert. He opened the footage. Footprints. What? Yeah. Slowly forming one after the other across the boards of the porch. Nobody. Just the prints. Each step soaking into the wood. As though invisible feet were pacing back and forth. Suddenly, the camera feed cut out. Jason dropped the phone. Emily was staring at the front door now. Her lips moved silently. He followed her gaze. The handle was turning. So. Deliberate. Back and forth. Jason backed away, grabbing Emily's arm. They rushed into the kitchen, barricading the door with a table, a chair, anything they could move. The power flickered. The lights dimmed. Then the voice returned, louder than ever. Not from the window. Not from the cameras, but from inside the walls. Let me in. Over and over. They aired. Echoing. Filling the house like floodwater. Every surface began to tremble. Dishes rattled in the cupboards. The floor groaned beneath their feet. Emily covered her ears, eyes wide in terror. Then came the water. Seeping through the ceiling. Chirping down the walls. Pouring from vents that shouldn't even be connected to anything wet. It soaked the floor cold and slick. Emily slipped, fell, and Jason pulled her back up. They fled into the basement. The only place left untouched. But it wasn't safe. There, scrawled across the concrete walls, in lines of dripping, dirty water, were the words. You already did. Jason staggered back, hitting a pipe. He did remember saying yes. He did remember answering it. But he had 9 words. In fear. In acknowledgement. In the moment he accepted it was real. It had been enough. Emily stared at the wall, her lips trembling. I dreamed about it, she whispered. Last week. Before you came. A storm. A voice. I thought it was nothing. She had known. Felt it. Even before he arrived. Jason looked up. Water dripped from the ceiling. The concrete above them darkened with spreading stains. Then the lights went out, plunging them into blackness. The last sound they heard before everything was swallowed in wet silence was the voice. No longer a whisper. It spoke with clarity. With certainty. "You let me in." When the lights returned, it was the basement they recognized. Jason opened his eyes to a space warped by shadow and water, where the walls seemed to breathe and drip with something older than moisture. Emily clutched his arm so tightly her fingernails dug into his skin, but he didn't flinch. He barely noticed. His mind was locked in a deeper place now, somewhere past fear. Somewhere colder. The basement had changed. The water pooling at their feet wasn't just from the storm above. It was darker, thicker, and it rippled without cause as if something beneath it stirred, waiting. The writing on the wall had spread. What once had been a message you already did was now a mural. Water smeared symbols. Hands. Faces. All distorted like melting wax, as though the very wall was absorbing something human. Jason couldn't tell how long they'd been down there. Time moved differently. The lights above flickered between moments, each pulse revealing more water, more rot, more of it. The entity no longer stayed hidden. It no longer flickered in and out of vision. It stood openly in the corner of the basement now. No longer blurred. No longer tentative. Its body was lanky and grotesque, skin like drowned flesh, stretched thin over impossible bones. Its face, if it could still be called that, was a collage of soaked features, some half-formed, some borrowed. A mouth too wide. Eyes black as bottomless water. And from that mouth came the voice that had haunted Jason for weeks. No longer a whisper, but a certainty. "You're mine now." Emily screamed. Not from what she saw but from what she felt. The presence did just exist in the room. It pressed into their thoughts, burrowed under their memories, flooded their senses with echoes. The drip of water now sounded like the beating of something vast and hollow. The air tasted of rust and grave soil. Every inch of the basement groaned under the weight of something that had been let in, something that should never have crossed over. Jason wanted to fight. He wanted to scream. But there was no weapon here. No door to shut. No light to reach for. He had invited it, not through consent, but through belief. The moment he gave it his attention, the moment he stared into the corner of the room and asked himself if what he saw was real, that was when it entered. And now it wasn't asking for permission. It had already taken it. Emily collapsed against the wall, whispering prayers that turned to sobs. Jason moved toward her, his shoes splashing in the dark water, the ripples moving unnaturally, not fading but echoing outward like the basement had become a pool without end. He reached her just as the lights surged one last time and then went dead for good. In the pitch black, the voice returned, but now it spoke inside their minds, behind their ears, as if it were draped across their shoulders. "You thought you left the storm behind. But the storm is where I live. I am the rain that follows you home." Jason clutched Emily and tried to speak, but no sound came. Only the sound of water moving. Sloshing. Flemming. The last thing he saw before he closed his eyes was the water rising above their knees, dragging with it a darkness that swallowed color, memory, identity. The world became sound and water. And a voice. Then silence. When they were found, 2 days later, by local police responding to a report of a flooded basement and a strange electrical surge in the area, Emily and Jason were both alive. Physically, they were huddled in the corner of the basement, wrapped in a soaking sheet, staring at the far wall where nothing but concrete remained. Both were unresponsive, eyes wide, mouths slightly open, whispering words no one could understand. The house was dry. No rain had fallen in that part of the state for 3 days. No storm had passed through. There was no water damage. No footprints. No power outage recorded. The only sound in the house was the faintest echo, barely perceptible, like a memory buried in silence. A whisper. "Let me in." Jason and Emily were placed in separate facilities. Neither has spoken a coherent sentence since. But every night, around the same time, a sleep begins to pull at their consciousness. Nurses report the same behavior. Their heads turn toward the window. Their lips part. And they both begin to smile.